Richard, I'm in my bathroom. Are you in your bathroom?
I'm in my bathroom, Marnie, yeah.
Okay. I need your numbers.
Okay, well, I'm 1 metre 90 tall, or 6'2".
Okay. And have you got your scales?
I've got my scales here, and it tells me that I am 94 kilos.
Okay. So you're 1.9 metres squared divided by 94 kilos gives you 26. Congratulations, 26.
BMI of 26, okay. Let's do yours now.
Okay, so standing on, that's some kilos. It's 2.62. And then I divide that and it gives me 30, which was very brave of me.
Well done.
Welcome to Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. I'm Marnie Chesterton. That was me in my bathroom, my producer Richard in his, armed with calculators, scales and tape measures, because we were calculating a common measure of our body's health, the Body Mass Index, or BMI. And the reason? It's because of listener Mike in Germany.
Hi, my name is Mike Müller, and my question for Crowd Science is, what does the BMI tell me about my health, and is it still a useful measurement tool today? I'm interested in this question because my BMI has always been too high and tells me therefore that I'm overweight, but I don't think that I really am. I've always been quite muscly and I'm not the tallest, so therefore I think that gives me a bit of a distorted BMI. So I wonder if you just come all in different shapes and sizes. My background is that I have worked with dogs for many, many years, and we can't be all greyhounds. So I would describe myself probably more the shape and size of a Labrador crossed with a Staffy. My neighbors, they are like greyhounds. They can eat what they want and they are really tall and slim. For me, I have just a different size and shape. So the BMI would never give me an accurate reading, I feel.
The Body Mass Index, or BMI, gives you a number. The World Health Organization says that 20 to 25 is normal, 25 to 30 is overweight, 30 to 35 is obese, and over 35 morbidly obese. Their latest global figures put adult obesity at 1 person in 8, double what it was in 1990, they say. Mike, producer Richard and I have BMIs of between 26 and 30. Mike has a strong feeling that his is not a fair reflection of his general health. Is he right? And if so, why on earth did the BMI rise to its current status as universal health marker? Time for a bit of history. The inventor of the BMI was a 19th century Belgian astronomer called Adolphe Quetelet, who was interested in the nature of the average man, or some say ideal man. Even then, he was thinking in terms of populations rather than individual healthcare. Enter the US health insurance companies, who noticed that those at the extremes of the BMI, the very fat and very thin, had a higher risk of dying. The modern term, Body Mass Index, was coined in 1972 by Harvard physiologist Ancel Keys, who said the BMI proves to be, if not fully satisfactory, at least as good as any other relative weight index as an indicator of obesity. Note the qualifier, not fully satisfactory. But from the 80s onward, the BMI has been used by the World Health Organization for recording obesity statistics. But what does it tell us? That's a question for Dr. Naveed Sattar, Professor of Cardiometabolic Medicine at the University of Glasgow and Chair of the UK's Obesity Mission.
It's a very good screening tool. It allows us to work out in a really quick fashion whether we need to delve into aspects related to excess weight, and also whether I need to do additional blood tests to tell me, is the weight that the individual is living with leading to some complications of her tissues or organs that then needs me to look for, diagnosing further conditions linked to excess weight.
Why is having a lot of fat bad for you?
So if you have excess fat beyond the body's needs, it will seep into various organs, into the blood, into the liver, pancreas, muscles around the kidneys and around the heart. And excess fat effectively alters the fuel that the body sees. It applies pressure on the pumps and pipes within your body. It also disrupts some of the filters of your body, i.e. your kidneys and your liver, so that their function actually is impaired.
But one of the many criticisms of the body mass index is that it's inaccurate. Some incredibly fit athletes, like boxer Mike Tyson or tennis legend Serena Williams, or even people like our listener Mike, have high BMIs which suggest they're overweight and unhealthy when actually they just have a lot of muscle. Given this flaw, does Naveed see a point to measuring the BMI?
Yes, there is. I think, again, it will allow us, as many nations, to look at the track of excess adiposity over time. That's what we've measured. Many people are able to measure change. If they undertake a change, the best and most accurate way to measure that change, at least in the short term, is the weight, which is measured on scales, which is the key part of BMI. And as I said, it's part of a screening tool, but you're completely correct. BMI on its own is not enough. We are gradually understanding that where you put your fat and what the consequences of fat are in terms of your body and how doctors capture that and how we explain that to our patients, as well as think about other aspects, what conditions they have and what their activities of daily living are. Putting all of that into a package will better help us assess whether that individual's weight is leading to problems that we can help them with.
Naveed says that excess fat puts our bodies under stress, like an overloaded car. And he admits he still finds the BMI useful, sort of as a starter test to see whether more measures of a person's health are needed. But if the BMI is telling fit, muscly types they're overweight, I wonder what other tools are on offer.
Hi, I'm Leah. Nice to meet you.
Sometimes, here on Crowd Science, we turn human guinea pig. And so, with a certain amount of reluctance, I went to the University of Westminster in central London to have a go on something called a BodPod, an expensive body composition measuring device. There, to talk me through the process, were Head of Life Sciences, Professor Brendan Noble, and nutritional expert technician Leah Siegel.
Today we're going to be doing a BodPod measurement. So it is a measure of your body composition using air displacement. And the first few things that we'll do, we'll take your height and weight, and you'll put on a very tight outfit, just so that there's no added volume with your clothes. And we'll also put a lovely little swim cap on for you. And then you'll go into the pod and you'll have your body composition measured.
Great. What's the point of this?
So looking at body composition, people do it for a lot of different reasons, maybe from a health perspective, maybe from a performance perspective if they take part in sport or athletics.
Okay. So, Brendan, is this better than doing a BMI?
Yes, it's almost certainly going to be better than doing a BMI. BMI is very useful across the population, but BMI is based on height and weight, and muscle is very much heavier than fat. And so if you've got a lot of muscle, this is going to skew things.
I should tell the radio audience, because this is radio, I do not have a great deal of muscle. I wouldn't say I'm stacked, so more of curvy. Yes. Well, we'll see what the BodPod says.
You're fine.
Yeah. So, if anyone's seen any sci-fi film where people are kind of frozen for long-distance space travel, and they put them in these kind of pods with a little sort of viewing window out the front, it's basically that's what it looks like.
We'll open up the BodPod and you can sit inside. The first measure, it will be very quick, about a minute. You just need to sit still, breathe normally, and not talk.
I was sitting in this pod, in my underwear, with my hair bundled under a swimming cap, trying very hard not to move. Wouldn't want my results to be inaccurate.
Perfect, so we can open the BodPod now. Okay.
That was weird.
So you can exit the pod if you would like.
As I got dressed, the BodPod algorithm did its calculations. I had to tell it my ethnicity because if I were a black Caribbean woman, for example, my bones would be stronger and heavier. Yet another subtle difference that the BMI doesn't factor in.
Yeah, so this is a printout of your test results. It has a few different bits of information here. So one of them is the body fat percentage that you can see there. You also have your FFM percentage. So FFM is your fat-free mass. That is everything in your body that is not fat. So that's your muscle, your bones, your organs.
Is it really worth me having all this information, unless I want to compete in the Olympics this summer? And frankly, I've left training a little late for that. After all, the information from the BodPod, how much of me is fat tissue, is not massively different to what I've learnt from my BMI. I could also have used a tape measure around my waist or pinched an inch of belly fat with some calipers. At the office, I've also used a bioelectric impedance machine. You grip it with both hands and it sends a small and safe electrical current through your body, measuring resistance. The higher the resistance, the higher the body fat. They all give me the information I knew all along. I'm overweight, borderline obese. But that's just me. BMI is a globally used measure, and as I just mentioned, BodPod takes ethnicity into account in a way that weight divided by your height squared just doesn't. Is that a problem? Well, let's ask some people from one of the world's most obese countries, according to BMI statistics, Tonga, in the South Pacific. What do Tongans think about their weight and about the BMI?
For me, us Pacific Islanders, mostly I'll speak for Tongans, we were built different. Heavy bones, big build. Even us here, we still see our grandma still making it to 80s, 90s years old. And listening to these surveys on the news, I don't know how it goes. But I think for us here in Tonga, we need, even on the Pacific, we need to have our different way of surveys, for us to really calculate if we are obese or not. Not just judge us by how we look and how big we are and how big is our legs. We love these legs. You can't stand in front of me if I run straight to you. You will regret it. That's how we love it, and we still light. We can run really fast. So don't measure us by how we look.
I've been involved in a few weight loss programs, and whenever we go to weigh in, they give us the recommended BMI for one's height. And I'm kind of like one of those taller Tongan women, 1.75 meters. When they tell me my recommended weight for my height, I look at that and I think to myself, I'm never going to get there. I'm going to starve before I actually achieve that weight. And, because one is just naturally taller or has a bigger physique. So there needs to be some thought given into constructing a BMI that's probably based on the genetics of those people, rather than prescribing something where, one feels like a failure from the start.
That was Whanonga Pulu and sailor Lataila Kepa from Tonga speaking to us there about their BMIs. What they've highlighted makes me think back to listener Mike's dog analogy. Maybe BMI is not picking up on the difference between a slender greyhound type or a solid pit bull type. And yet, when I look at the health stats for Tonga, obesity does seem to be an issue. Life expectancy in Tonga is below the global average at just over 71 years, and diabetes, which is strongly linked to obesity, is the leading cause of death there. There are clearly all sorts of factors at play here, from body type to lifestyle to availability of healthy food. But at this point, I still want more clarity on how much the BMI measurement is bringing to the table. What does it teach you about your health?
The BMI doesn't tell you anything about how your organs work or do not work, which is what normally defines whether a person has an ongoing illness. And so BMI itself is a measure of risk, but it's not a measure of health.
Meet Dr. Francesco Rubino. He's chair of bariatric and metabolic surgery at King's College London. That means he specialises in surgery related to obesity. He's also leading a commission or group at the medical journal The Lancet, looking at the current obesity epidemic and asking useful questions like, what is a medically useful definition of obesity, and should we replace the BMI? What does he make of the high BMI scores across many islands of the South Pacific, like Tonga?
Yes, I think what is important to say is that we don't actually know exactly what is causing this epidemic and pandemic of obesity that we have seen in the last many decades. We have assumed that is a personal decision to eat more or exercise less, but every scientific piece of evidence tells us a different story. The reason why there is a pandemic is not completely understood, but it's clear that there are multiple factors that contribute. So certainly our genetic makeup makes some people more predisposed to develop obesity, even in the same environment. And then there is probably something that changed in recent years, in the most recent times, like in the last 3 to 4 decades, in the food environment that perhaps is fueling this pandemic. So reducing obesity to a matter of lifestyle choices is just inconsistent with scientific evidence.
There is an implication that we trust the BMI because it's a scientific tool used by doctors. And the suggestion is it's a tool we can control. Remember, it's our weight divided by our height squared. We can't, of course, control our height, but we can, the BMI suggests, control our weight.
To some extent, it is true that you can modify your weight if you indulge in some type of food and overeating over a period of time, or if you join a gym and start doing some exercise, you will see your waistline may actually go up and down as you would expect. And so you build this idea that you're in control. But the problem is that we are only in control for a limited amount of our body weight regulation. When you start having a level of weight that is significantly elevated and fat mass is no longer physiologically normally regulated, then thinking that you can reduce and change at wish, undo obesity as you wish, is just naive.
If, as Francesco says, we have limited control over our weight, is it problematic that we're using a blunt tool like BMI to advise patients on how to approach their health?
BMI was never meant to be a clinical tool. And the problem is that we have used it as such, mostly for insurance purposes, because it's an easy tool to define who gets coverage for a treatment, who doesn't. But in doing so, we have seen time and again for over many, many years that people can be denied access to treatment based on arbitrary definitions that take BMI above or below a certain threshold as a reason why people should be treated. That absolutely makes no medical sense, but unfortunately it's the way insurance coverage in private and public health systems still works.
Yes, I've seen it. I've experienced it. I could tell that there was a treatment that I was up for, and I thought, because my BMI is kind of around 30, I thought, I know that if this is over 30, this is going to be something in the arsenal for them to be able to say, no, you can't have this treatment. And so when I knew I was being weighed, I just didn't have any breakfast. And I was kind of desperately trying to pee beforehand.
Well, the paradox is that sometimes a BMI of a certain level is used to say that people if they don't meet a certain threshold, they cannot get coverage for a treatment for obesity. On the other hand, if you have a BMI that is too high, people don't let you have access to another treatment, not for obesity, but for something else, on the assumption that obesity might actually make it more difficult for that treatment to succeed. So basically, no matter what, people with obesity are always put in a difficult situation, and I think they are treated unfairly by society at large, but including by the healthcare system and medical professionals. To me, weight stigma is the single most important problem we have in obesity.
Weight stigma, also known as fat phobia, and BMI's role in it is the subject of philosopher Kate Mann's new book, Unshrinking: How to Fight Fat Phobia. I wondered if she'd go as far as saying that the BMI is so crude a tool that we should just drop it completely.
So I think many weight-inclusive or weight-neutral physicians do believe that for a couple of reasons. One is that having your BMI calculated at every doctor's visit can be very stigmatizing, and especially in a fat-phobic society, really leads to demonstrable results of people avoiding healthcare as they gain weight. So taking that out of the equation can be quite helpful in helping people not avoid the doctor, which we have evidence that as women gain weight and as they enter higher BMI classes, they avoid healthcare in direct proportion to increases in BMI, which is really serious.
The flip side of that would be that if you do go to your doctor and you do have a high, say, obese BMI, that will be the focus of whatever you've gone to the doctor about, because the messaging is you need to lose weight rather than addressing what else you might have gone to the doctor for.
Yeah, totally. And that was the other thing I think is worth mentioning here. Oftentimes the focus of doctor's appointments become, well, you need to lose weight. But the fact is we don't yet have humane, effective, feasible, safe solutions for people to reliably lose weight in a way that is actually practical for people and that has good results and does more good than harm in the majority of cases. So we know that diets don't work. They have incredibly high failure rates of between 95 and 98%. We know that actually dieting is a really good predictor of long-term weight gain rather than the converse. And that comes from not just one or two studies, but the most robust meta-analyses of really every long-term diet study that's been done to date. So it may be that the best solution for people is to engage in health behaviors that are positive, like exercise and eating well, and not taking weight loss as a realistic and feasible health goal for the majority of bodies.
You say there's a moral panic over the so-called obesity epidemic. Is that related to the BMI?
Yes, absolutely. The BMI, many people don't know, the standards for it were changed in about 1998 in the US, where people who were previously categorized as having normal weight became overweight, and similarly people who were previously classified as overweight became obese overnight because the standard for a healthy weight was decreased from about 27 or 28, depending on gender, to 25 being the cutoff for then becoming overweight for both men and women.
You can't just change the classifications, can you?
Well, they did. They can. And it was based on World Health Organization recommendations. But this wasn't based, again, on the idea that people are actually becoming unhealthy at a certain weight. It was based partly on a purely arbitrary idea that the number 25 was a nice, easy number for people to remember.
So take the BMI out of the equation? Or, I don't know, it sounds like if you were in charge, maybe there's a lot of awareness training you do.
We desperately need to do physician anti-bias training that includes weight stigma, both because we know that physicians are not just guilty of implicit bias in this regard. Doctors openly say things like they regard fat patients as a waste of their time and that fat patients are more likely to annoy them. They're less likely to want to help fat patients and they spend less time with us. But when I speak to really brilliant weight-inclusive physicians like Dr. Mara Gordon in the US, what she has done is take weight out of the conversation. She doesn't assess patients' BMI. She goes directly to more precise indications of health like blood pressure, like blood work, and particular metrics depending on a patient's particular symptoms. And that both makes patients more likely to want to come back to a doctor who isn't shaming them or making their weight, which as a fat person, I can assure you that I'm very aware of my weight at any particular time. But these patients are more likely to want to return to the doctor and get that humane, inclusive care that could be really life-altering, potentially life-saving.
So the BMI, invented by an astronomer, which has had its categories, overweight and obese, tinkered with over time, which was never meant to be used as a clinical tool for individuals, and which, as we've established, doesn't take into account different body types and ethnicities, is still being used as the way to sort those at risk of ill health from those with a so-called healthy BMI. Where do all these problems leave the BMI in the future? Is it a quick tool to help doctors assess potential problems related to being overweight, Or is it destined for the scrap heap of medical history?
I think what I can anticipate is that the conclusion of this commission is that BMI alone cannot be used in clinical practice.
That's Francesco Rubino again, whose commission is looking into, among other things, how the BMI should be used in the future.
We cannot use BMI alone for clinical purposes to understand if somebody has an illness or if somebody doesn't, or even in the first place, if somebody has a really excess fat tissue or just an excess weight due to other reasons. So what we are advocating is to have a more nuanced assessment that uses BMI as a screening tool, but maybe looking at other measures as well.
But what do we even want from whatever new form the BMI will take? Is the focus about getting a better measure of fatness, or is there a better route to measuring health, which is less focused on measuring fatness at all? Kate Mann has some thoughts for those with a BMI of over 30 or 35.
I think that there is a lot of shame and blame when it comes to weight, and I think a lot of people feel that, well, there's something a bit wrong with them, that they are heavier because they're somehow not doing it right. And I really want people to understand that bodies just come in a range of shapes and sizes. That's always been the case in human history. I think it always will be the case. And I think that oftentimes the relationship between weight and health is really exaggerated and oversimplified. I tell my story in the book about having been a person who did have a BMI at one point in this quote-unquote severely obese category, a BMI of over 40, and I was perfectly healthy. I had excellent blood work. I had excellent blood pressure. I was very active. And then I lost quite a lot of weight just through starvation dieting, which was the only way my body would lose weight. And believe me, I've tried everything. And I'm now a lighter, still overweight, but now a lighter and much less healthy person because my body has really been through the ringer of starvation diets.
So listener Mike asked us what the BMI could tell him about his health, and frankly, given that his BMI is neither very low or very high, it doesn't tell us very much. Those who do use it say it's a good gateway tool for assessing if someone is at risk of certain diseases. But even fans of it admit it was modelled on the average white man, and it's only a rough test of whether someone needs further tests. Those who aren't fans point out that if you are overweight, you face enough stigma from society without a number on your chart that might mean your doctor focuses on your weight, not any other medical issue you have. I'm not denying that carrying excess weight increases your risk of dozens of diseases, from type 2 diabetes to cancer. It's just I'm left wondering, given that shaming and dieting haven't stopped the growing numbers of us who are overweight, what is the best approach to keeping us healthy? But that's another crowd science for another time. My thanks to Mike for his question, and back to him for the credits.
That's all for this episode of Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. This question came from Mike in Dresden in Germany. And if you'd like to ask the team a question, then email it to crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. And this program was presented by Marnie Chesterton and produced by Richard Walker. Thanks for listening. Tschüss.